That's right, Bear Down Bears fans. It's time for another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast, Bears Banter, powered by Second City Gridiron. Bill Zimmerman with you, and we got a beautiful game to talk about, an absolute shellacking as our Chicago Bears crush the Cleveland Browns 31-3. We're going to get into it because there is plenty to talk about from this game. We're also going to talk about it with Moose Johnston, Daryl Johnston, NFL on Fox. Of course, part of the call on Fox on Sunday against Cleveland. We're going to talk to him about that game. We're going to talk to him about the development of Caleb Williams, Ben Johnson, how this has all been coming together throughout the season. But before we do, you're going to have to deal with me for a little while because I am feeling good after that game. I know I thought the Bears and Browns were going to play a little bit closer. And look, I'm basing that off of this season and how the Bears really don't just bury teams. At the same time, I did not realize upon the recording of last week's podcast that the Cleveland Browns were basically going to have their entire backup offensive line unit in. That certainly was going to play a major impact. I would not have said the Bears were going to win by 28. I do feel I probably would have said the Bears were going to win by 10 points at that point. Had I known it was that dire, that's, I guess, on me for not doing more research earlier in the week. But let's talk about this game, and let's talk about a few different aspects of this one. And I thought some of the media, the national media's narratives coming into this one were kind of comical and so short-sighted. And I think the media some of them have decided that Caleb Williams just isn't the guy, isn't going to cut it. I'm not sure why that's the issue. We want to talk about toxic masculinity and things like that. We can, but putting all the social narratives aside, I think this comes down to an idea that maybe this didn't look as well in the first season and they jumped on him and just don't want to pivot on their opinions. And look, Colin Cowherd flip-flops more than anyone else in the world, but at least he is reacting to what he's actually seeing and not what he wants to see. And we can call out people like LaShawn McCoy and Chris Broussard, who both want to sit there and say Shedeur Sanders is already better than Caleb Williams, and that's laughable. And the idea that, like, well, Caleb Williams hasn't thrown for 300 yards this year, and Shedeur Sanders did it in his third career start or whatever. Do we want to go back to what Caleb Williams did in his early starts against Jacksonville and against Carolina? Do we want to bring up the numbers early in last season and sit there and if we want to make snap judgments about quarterbacks? No, we're going to put all that aside, that the Bears were 4-2 and that Caleb throws 4 touchdowns in London and all the things that happened that were positive for Caleb Williams. And we'll just focus on the disaster of the 10-game losing streak, which, by the way, there were plenty of positives mixed in there. The overall body was a disaster, but the body of work was a disaster for everyone on that Bears team. We want to talk about him throwing for over 300 yards against Brian Flores' defense. If we want to talk about him leading the team down and getting what should have been the game-winning drive against the Washington Commanders of Matt Eberflus and Tyreek Stevenson hadn't botched the final drive, Washington should have been at like their own 35-yard line with no shot at a Hail Mary. If we want to talk about mismanaging the clock in Detroit on Thanksgiving and blocked field goals and all the BS that went around what could have improved Caleb Williams' outlook on his rookie season significantly, but there was such a dumpster fire around him that didn't happen, and that's fine. That's in the past. It doesn't matter. Ben Johnson is here. That was Matt Eberflus. None of that really matters because this is, yes, it's Caleb's second year, but it's year one with Ben Johnson. And here's, I guess, what's so frustrating is the amount of uninformed opinions that have big microphones on the national media landscape. And people like to point to Stephen A. Smith and Colin Cowherd and the guys that really get amplified. But there's plenty of other guys as well, like Chris Broussard. Like, I'm sorry. First of all, Chris Broussard's an NBA guy to me. I'm not going to NFL takes to Chris Broussard. I don't even know if he's still considered an NBA guy, but that's where he cut his teeth with ESPN years and years ago. But Chris Broussard sitting there saying, well, Caleb Williams hasn't thrown for 300 yards yet. Well, he's thrown for like 270 to 290 on multiple occasions. And the Chicago Bears run the football, run it well, and run it often. So yes, if they're getting 35 carries at 5.5 yards a snap, and a pop, yes, Caleb Williams isn't going to throw the ball as often. Also, when you run the ball that effectively, you shorten the game because the clock keeps running. So Caleb Williams is going to have less opportunities to have a high volume 45 pass attempt, 375-yard game because his team's down 20 points. And the idea that people like Chris Broussard, and I'm just going to keep bringing him up, and I'll bring up to LaShawn McCoy here in a second, that Chris Broussard is going to be like, well, he hasn't thrown for 300 yards. Shedeur Sanders just threw for 300 yards. Shedeur Sanders is going to outplay Caleb Williams. That is such, and kudos to Danny Parkins for just calling him out on it, forcing a bet on him, and making Chris Broussard look silly. Because when you have takes that bad, you need to make them look silly. Like, you need to expose people. And yes, Chris Broussard and Danny Parkins are teammates, so he's not going to do it rudely. He's not going to do it ruthlessly, but you need to call that crap out. And I'm glad Danny Parkins did not let that slide. I hope he and the crew enjoy that free dinner at the hands of Chris Broussard's wallet. And when it comes to LaShawn McCoy, here's what I will say. I have been able to be around a lot of professional athletes and professional athletes that are making the pivot into sports media. And the one thing I've seen from a lot of these professional athletes is the fact that they look at season statistics in kind of a period end of story. Like, if they just sit there and see this guy had 90 catches for 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns, he had an awesome season. And he probably did have an awesome season, but there's nuances to that. So if you see a player who doesn't have gaudy volume statistics, like the guy that had 1,200 yards, you say, well, he had a much better season. But maybe he had 90 catches. Maybe he had 165 targets because his team sucked and there wasn't anyone else on the team. And maybe there's a guy with 60 catches who only had 85 targets and he had 900 yards and 8 touchdowns and did a hell of a lot more with his opportunities than the high volume guy. There's a lot of nuance that plays. And I understand. I'm sitting here literally trying to say what NFL players are missing, but I'm saying if they watch the game and see things, they're going to see a lot more than I do. And I'm not pretending that I'm going to know more than most NFL players in terms of when they're watching a game. Sure, I'm going to disagree with some of them, but you got to respect their opinion. But a lot of them don't watch the games. I will not bring up this player, who this was. But as a producer, I remember we had an interview set up with a legend, an all-time legendary Hall of Famer. And he was coming on Monday morning. And we had a full slate of NFL Sunday games. And there was also like a big controversy as well. And I don't remember exactly what the controversy was. And bring this guy on and ask him. And he says on the air, well, you can't expect me to watch every game. He just said it. Like, he just wanted to talk about his career and football and his days and all that stuff. And he was literally doing a media tour to talk about football on a Monday after not watching the NFL game. So there are plenty of players who just don't watch. And there's plenty that do. I mean, Dan Orlovsky's watching tape. There's plenty of former players. Kurt Warner watches a lot of tape. Plenty of players are doing the work. I'm not saying this as a blanket statement, but there's plenty that don't and look at the box scores. I'm telling you, it happens. You're going to sit there and be like, Bill, you can't tell me that just NFL players. No, they look at the box scores. They bring up guys' career stats and they just compare their numbers, to other players. And that's what they look at. They're very statistic driven because those stats are what get them paid. That efficient guy that I talked about that only had 800 yards, usually he's not the guy that gets more money than the guy that got 1,200 yards on a lot more targets. Like, that's just kind of how the NFL works. They pay for what they see in front of them. And when they see statistics, they pay those statistics. They don't pay for efficiency. Now, some GMs do that, and those GMs are better at their jobs than the rest of them. But the bottom line here is that the media narratives coming in this game about Shedeur Sanders and Caleb Williams were laughable. And it played out on just how laughable they were. Shedeur Sanders had no idea what was going on with Dennis Allen's defense. He was lost. He did not see DeMarco Jackson at all. I mean, the Jalen Johnson interception, that was a pretty damn good throw from Shedeur, and Jalen made a great play on it. Jerry Jeudy, certainly, I remember thinking Jerry Jeudy was better than CeeDee Lamb coming out of that draft. Oops. This is why you got to be able to admit your mistakes, because if you talk for a living, you are going to say a lot of dumb crap. And looking back on it, again, Jerry Jeudy over CeeDee Lamb, plenty of people thought that, but CeeDee Lamb, certainly a better receiver than Jerry Jeudy. He has just not really panned out. I mean, the ball basically just bounced off his chest and into Jalen Johnson's arms. So I'm not saying like everything was Shedeur's fault, but at one point he was completing about 30% of his passes. He did not know how to get people open. It was an ugly performance from Shedeur, and they doesn't look quite as ugly thanks to fourth quarter passing when the Bears let the foot off the gas. Yes, he did make a couple deep balls to Isaiah Bond, and that's one thing we do need to worry about this Bears defense, is that they are giving up chunk plays, far too many of them. And I understand when you're going for turnovers, you're going to leave yourself vulnerable to giving up those big plays. And as long as they're getting the turnovers, those big plays you can deal with. But if they stop getting turnovers, and when your opponents improve, turnovers are harder to come by. So bottom line here is, when Matthew Stafford comes to town and he's thrown like 2 interceptions on the season, are the Bears going to pick him off 2 or 3 times? It's possible, but it may not be. So when you're dealing with that, you can't give up giant plays. And I'm not saying the Bears should switch their identity as to who they are. That defense needs to be what they've done and what they've been successfully over the course of this season. They have to stick to their identity. But at the same time, you cannot ignore the fact that you can't just be giving up chunk plays. Isaiah Bond had like 300 yards on the season, and he's got 90 yards against the Bears. We can't have that. The Bears need to button that stuff up. That's going to be really important for the defense moving forward here as the opponents get better. But when it comes back to Shedeur Sanders versus Caleb Williams, you saw how Shedeur struggled. Caleb Williams was going up against a better defense. There is no question. Look, we can say the Bears are doing, they turn the ball over more than anyone else, but the full body, the Browns have an excellent defense, led by Myles Garrett, led by some other players as well. That defense is very good. Caleb Williams handled a superior defense much, much better than Shedeur Sanders. And some of the throws that Caleb Williams made, and we're going to talk about the one that everybody's loving, and they should be loving it, and that is the second touchdown pass to DJ Moore. And when it happened in the moment, I was like, that looked a lot like Joe Montana's throw to Dwight Clark in the 1981, I guess technically 82 NFC Championship game, the 1981 NFL season. The catch, the legendary play that a lot of people call, and again, it's not like it was the most impossible throw of all time. It's considered the greatest throw and catch of all time because of the fact that the NFC Championship was on the line, and the 49ers, because of that play, went on to the Super Bowl, beat the Bengals, went on to become Super Bowl champions, the first one under Joe Montana. So I understand why that's considered the greatest play. And when I compare these two, I understand it's regular season against the 3-10 Cleveland Browns team versus NFC Championship. But it looked a hell of a lot like it. And then we see the camera angle that Fox 32 got from the end zone. And then you sit there and go, that's exactly the same angle that NFL Films got of the Joe Montana play. So I was the first to put it out. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the video skills that some people have in terms of taking two videos, splicing them together, lining everything up so the plays develop at the exact same time. But our guy Ryan from Bears Over Beers, he did just that. After I put out the initial thing about like, hey, see this Joe Montana play? See this Caleb Williams play? It looks almost identical. And Ryan did a great job. You can check it out on my timeline at Bill T. Zimmerman if you want. I retweeted it. It's right there of the play. And there's also an article on Windy City Gridiron about how Caleb Williams' throw mirrors arguably the greatest throw in NFL history. You can check it out there. And I have a bunch of different tweets that show all the plays throughout. So you can look at it. It is insane how similar the two plays are. Insane. Caleb Williams, Joe Montana, both with guys breathing down their necks, rolling out towards the sideline, looking, little bit of a pump fake, lofts the ball. Even the spiral, which was about a 95% spiral with just a tad of a wobble, the same. DJ Moore and Dwight Clark almost in the identical part of the end zone where they caught it. You know, DJ's was a little lower. Dwight Clark's ball was a little higher. Dwight Clark had to extend more. DJ Moore also got more vertical, so that also helps. But it was almost identical, the two plays. And it's just remarkable what Caleb Williams is continuing to show in a week in and week out basis. The rollout play to Cole Kmet, like they just keep happening. The Philadelphia Eagles play again to Cole Kmet. The touchdown to Zacchaeus. He is threading needles. And that's what's amazing. Like Brett Favre, the gunslinger, right? And we all hate Brett Favre, probably for multiple reasons now at this point. But from just a Bears-Packers perspective, yes, we all hate Brett Favre. He beat the Bears a lot more often than he lost to them. But we always hear that Brett Favre, the gunslinger mentality, that he thought he could make every throw, and he whipped it in there. And a lot of times he made the throw, and it was a fantastic throw. But a lot of times it resulted in interceptions. And that's what's so remarkable about Caleb Williams. And I keep wondering, I'm like, is this a fluke? Is this something that's going to get corrected by the numbers? Because when you make the throws that Caleb Williams is making, like the throw to Zacchaeus, like the throw to DJ Moore, and Caleb's got the confidence, and he says, I can make every throw. And I know he can make every throw. But like those throws, they're so close to being turnover-worthy passes, but they're not, and they go for completions. And if they don't go for completions and they're incompletions, he doesn't turn it over. He has the lowest interception rate of anyone for their first 1,000 pass attempts. That's where he is, but he still does those throws. If that doesn't course correct, if those interceptions don't jump, and it's just not weirdly low right now, that he has the ability and the velocity he puts on the ball absolutely helps. That was one thing about John Elway. Like John Elway had so much velocity on the ball that defensive players talked about how it was difficult to intercept him. And maybe that's part of what plays in with Caleb Williams, or maybe he's truly that good at knowing if he puts it 4 inches lower, that it's an interceptable ball, but he's going to put it 4 inches higher. Like that kind of, that's what we're talking about. That's the degree of difficulty with these Caleb Williams passes. So it is absolutely remarkable to me that the Chicago Bears are sitting here in a situation that they have a quarterback who makes the throws he makes and doesn't turn the football over. It almost doesn't make any sense that it's possible. So yes, does Caleb Williams still need to clean up some of the on-time stuff and some of the easier stuff? Yes, he does. Do I think it's continuing to get better over the last few weeks? I do. And I think it's going to continue to get better over the next few weeks and hopefully put the Bears in a good position to be in for a playoff run because their quarterback is playing well and the Bears are peaking at the right time. And that's the question. Have the Bears peaked? Are we at the peak? Because the Chicago Bears are definitely playing their best football of the season right now. But are they just a team that is continuing to improve and they're going to keep getting better? That's the thing. This isn't like a team that peaked and had a valley and then really peaked and had a valley. No, this is a team. It's not perfectly linear, but for the most part, it's the line graph has been steadily going up all season long. So have the Bears not hit their peak yet? We don't know. We don't know if the Bears are peaking right now or if they're going to be peaking a month from now in the NFL playoffs. That's what's so fascinating about this team with this kind of level of a turnaround. Because when we look at this and we sit here and say, well, they look dominant against the Eagles. They almost pulled it off against the Packers. That was good. But this Browns team is a bad football team, and the Bears pulverized them. And that was the problem the first couple months of the season. The Bears were winning games. Like, oh, they barely beat the Raiders. They stink. They barely beat the Commanders. They stink. They barely beat Team X, and they stink, right? We heard it for months and months. Well, now, at this point in the season, the Bears take a bad team and slap them around and say, get off my field. You don't belong on the field with us. We are two different classes of teams. And that's what the Bears did. Now, going in, back in first place, thank you, Denver Broncos, against the Green Bay Packers this week. And I'm already seeing it with the Green Bay Packers fans. We're so hurt. We can't possibly win this game in Chicago, which, of course, is setting it up perfectly for them to sit here and say, well, of course you beat us. We're too injured to play. And they'll try and shrug their shoulders off of it. Or they beat the Bears again and can sit there and say, wow, we didn't have Micah Parsons, we didn't have Tucker Kraft, and we still beat your asses. Like, that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to set it up so they are in a win-win situation. But the bottom line here is it doesn't matter who's hurt. It's a war of attrition. And I'll speak about Parsons specifically here in a second. The bottom line here is the Green Bay Packers are playing the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears have a half-game lead on the division. The Green Bay Packers, if they lose this game, are going to be a game and a half behind the Bears, and suddenly the tiebreaker looks a lot more different when the Bears have split and head-to-head no longer matters. Now, again, it's not going to matter in terms of the true tiebreaker because they're not going to be tied because of that tie that the Packers had with the Dallas Cowboys. But I'm just saying in terms of how it looks on paper that these two teams split in the regular season. And when we see that, and we see a game and a half lead with 2 to play, that's going to look pretty damn good potentially for a division title. But the NFC is wild this year. And that's why Bears fans cannot get too ahead of themselves. This week going into the Green Bay Packers, with a win and a Lions loss, they will clinch a playoff spot. They are that close to clinching a playoff spot. But at the same time, if the Bears win this week and the Lions win their next 2 games, which is home against Pittsburgh and I believe at Minnesota, they're not impossible games. They are favored by almost a touchdown against Pittsburgh this week. The Lions win their next 2 games and they will be favored to do so. The Bears will be going into that 49ers game with this on the line. Again, that if they beat the Packers, win, clinch the division, and clinch no worse than the 2 seed, because at that point, they will have the tiebreaker. The Eagles won't be able to have a better record than them. And they will have the tiebreaker against the Eagles. They are obviously not going to have a worse record than the 4 seed. The 1 seed could still come out of the NFC West. The 1 seed will still be on the table for the Bears at that point. But a win will clinch them no worse than the 2 seed. But a loss would put them in a situation, and that's if Detroit wins their next 2, that they will be going in to the final game of the season with an 11-5 record. And the Detroit Lions will be going into the final game of the season with a 10-6 record. And they will be playing football at Soldier Field. And if the Bears win, they will make the playoffs and maybe even win the division, depending on what's going on with Green Bay. And if the Bears lose, they will drop to 11-6. The Lions will improve to 11-6. The Lions will have beaten the Bears twice, and the Bears will miss the playoffs. That's how much that leveraged that San Francisco game is. It is wild how much could potentially be on the line in week 17 for the Chicago Bears. But they can't get ahead of themselves. They have to beat the Green Bay Packers first. And obviously, I'll give a prediction at the end of the podcast. I'm feeling really good about this Packers game, not just because Micah Parsons is injured. That certainly plays into it, because I think that is going to drastically change how this defense operates. But because I think the Packers have some issues, and I think the Bears are going to just have the right mindset going into that game. But we'll talk about that game after Daryl Johnston joins us. But I do want to talk about Micah Parsons here for a second. And I get it, Packers fans. I think all Bears fans get it, because when Khalil Mack showed up here in 2018, we watched this guy get mugged for years. Years, Khalil Mack was getting mugged, held, bear hugged, tackled, just crime happening against Khalil Mack for years. And we'd sit there and piss and moan about it on social media. And the Packers fans would sit there and go, boo-hoo-hoo, Bears fans, tough luck. That's what you'd say. Then you go out and get Micah Parsons. And now you want to sit there and complain that Micah Parsons is getting held too much. Well, welcome to the life of an elite edge rusher. Just how it works. Edge rushers at that caliber, they're going to get held. They're going to get held a lot, and the refs aren't going to call it. Why? This is a quarterback league. They do not want their They don't want Patrick Mahomes to have a torn ACL. Patrick Mahomes sells tickets. Patrick Mahomes gets people in front of their television sets. The quarterbacks are the biggest stars. Sure, Parsons is a star. TJ Watt is a star. Myles Garrett. Like, I'm not saying there aren't star players. Justin Jefferson, right? There aren't star players. But who's driving the league? Who people talk? We talk about Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow. Drake May is the talk of the NFL. Matthew Stafford, MVP. These are the guys that drive the numbers. Brady and Manning, Roethlisberger, Breeze, Aaron Rodgers. These are the guys that get ratings. They are not going to want to get those players pulverized week in and week out. So yes, they will call the blatant holds. Not all of them, most of them. But you are going to be able to mug edges because they don't want quarterbacks getting killed. Bottom line, that's just how it is. Karan Amagaji mugged Jonathan Grenard for 3 quarters. They called a bunch at the end of the first quarter. Like, we can't call it. We're going to have to call it every play, or he's going to stop and Grenard is going to murder Caleb Williams. That happened last year. Go watch the tape. Amagaji mugged him for 3 quarters after that brutal first quarter. It's just how it goes. So Packers fans, Micah Parsons, deal with the fact that he's going to get held. Now, the injury, it's unfortunate. It sucks. I do not cheer for injuries. It sucks for Micah Parsons. He seems like a really good dude. He really, reached out to the Cowboys fan base. He got some Parsons jerseys and got them to Cowboys kids, fans who were kids that were, devastated that he got traded from the team. So I think Parsons is a pretty good guy. And I think it sucks for Micah Parsons that he's injured. Now, am I crying for the Packers fans? No, because injuries are a part of life. And Tucker Kraft is an awesome tight end. Micah Parsons is an awesome edge, and they lost them both. And that sucks. And that may be too much for them to overcome. That's life in the NFL. And I'm not saying the Bears didn't lose Caleb Williams. The Bears didn't lose Joe Thuney. The Bears didn't lose certain guys that they can't afford to lose. But Kyler Gordon had gotten on the field all year. Jalen Johnson just got on the field. Tremaine Edmonds was having a great year. He's missed. Dayo Odengbo ain't great. We know that, but he's out, and that's forcing Austin Booker, who should be a rotational edge, to be playing and starting and playing every down. There have been plenty of injury issues that the Bears have had to deal with, as must be the mailman's here, and the dogs are going crazy if you're hearing that. But bottom line here is injuries are a part of the NFL. It is a war of attrition. Packers got it rough. Might be too much for them to overcome. But the bottom line here is that's how it goes. And that sucks for Packers, but we ain't crying for you because the Chicago Bears are coming and they're planning on beating your ass and putting you a game and a half out. And I'll tell you this much. The Packers lose that game. They are going, and the line, let's talk about this for 1 second, and then we will get to the great Daryl Johnston. He's going to join me here in a second. All right. I'm going to bring up the standings here so I know exactly what I'm saying and I don't misspeak. Green Bay Packers are 9-4-1. Let's say the Bears beat them. They're 9-5-1. Detroit moves to 9-6 with a victory. Let's say the Lions move to 10-6. The Green Bay Packers play the Baltimore Ravens the following week. The Ravens look better. The Ravens are still going to be in the mix with the Pittsburgh Steelers to win that division. It's in Green Bay, but with no Parsons and no Kraft, they could lose that game. If the Packers lose the next two, they're going to be at 9-6-1. And the Detroit Lions are going to be at 10-6-1. If the Packers lose the next two to go to 9-6-1, and the Bears do lose to San Francisco at 11-5, well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Then the Bears and the Lions are playing for the division title. Bears move to 12-5 and win the division. Bears lose 11-6, become the wild card team, and the Lions win the division. Because if that's the case, the Green Bay Packers would be out of the NFL playoffs. And I'll tell you what would be really sweet, Ben Johnston, if somehow the Bears beat the Packers and beat the 49ers. And what would that mean? That would mean the Bears clinch the 2 seed. And if it is in such a situation that the Bears cannot get the 1 seed in week 18, and they have nothing to play for because they are locked into the 2 seed, and the Lions have to win to make the playoffs, Dan Campbell, Ben Johnson's buddy, he needs a win to make the playoffs, and the Bears have nothing to play for. But if the Bears beat the Lions and the Green Bay Packers beat the Vikings, then the Packers would make the playoffs. But the Bears say, we're resting everybody. We're taking a bye and give the Lions a walkover, and the Green Bay Packers miss the playoffs. Oh, how sweet would it be if the Bears hold the Packers' future in their hands and just let it flop onto the ground like a fish out of water, flopping around and letting the playoff hopes of the Green Bay Packers take their last breath because the Chicago Bears said, we're too good. We're resting for the playoffs. And don't think it didn't happen. It happened with the Chiefs last year. It happens. They don't have to be competitive advantage. None of that crap matters. It is possible, and it would be so freaking sweet. Daryl Johnston joins me next. This is Bill Zimmerman, Bears Banter. We'll be right back. Welcome back into the take 2. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back into the podcast. Excited to do this. His first time on this podcast. He was firsthand at Soldier Field watching the Chicago Bears really dismantle the Cleveland Browns 31-3. He is Daryl Johnston, NFL on Fox. He joins me now. Moose, Bill Zimmerman, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Bill. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Let's start with the game itself and your observations from what you saw, because I think the Chicago Bears, what I think was nice for Bears fans to see in this one is the Bears, obviously much better record than the Browns, a better team than the Browns. But in the past, these games that when everyone was trying to decide if the Bears were frauds, if they were actually a good team, these teams with losing records, the Bears were winning by a field goal, just a handful of points. They really handled Cleveland in this one. What did you see that really let the Bears set the tempo in this one?
Well, I think our group had a good feel coming into the game. We heard that phrase trap game, which I'm not a big fan of. I think everybody goes through the process, and it's all about your preparation and then your execution on game day. And sometimes you go out and you have a tough day. And that's to the point that you mentioned where Chicago has been for a number of years now. Every time you think that maybe they're turning that corner, they have one of those games pop up where, you don't have a great performance. I mean, we can look at Denver right now during the course of this season at 12-2. And, 5 of their last 5 games in a row, 17 points total, margin of victory. So the most important thing is getting the win. It's hard to win an NFL game. Now, that being said, if you want to be one of those teams that are going to make the playoffs and then get into the playoffs and get on a run, you better be able to handle business when you go up against an opponent who's having a tough season in the month of December. And when you looked at Cleveland, I think the big thing about Cleveland was if you took a game where you thought maybe they didn't play well as a team and you went back and looked at it like a Baltimore game early in the season and you see 41-17, You look at that game and you look how many different awkward positions the offense put that defense in, or the special teams put that defense in, and yet that defense played well. So I think that Ben Johnston was very well aware of a 3-10 Cleveland Browns team that had the potential to have a challenging afternoon just because of how good their defense was. And that was taken care of very quickly. You had that opening drive that was a 3-and-out. I still think Caleb should have just, kept that ball and on that bootleg out to the right side, just go get 6 and try and get some momentum on that opening drive. They bounced back on the next 2 and took it to 14-0. And maybe once or twice during the remainder of that game, you felt like they had an opportunity to shut the door, and they didn't. But Cleveland never really was able to get back into it. So I think that was kind of a statement thing for this Bears team, because they had played a lot of close games. To your point, nobody's really given them a lot of credit this year so far about what they've accomplished. So I think really, having that type of victory, a 31-3 victory against the Cleveland Browns it's impressive in the month of December, when you're trying to show people that you're a better team. You're trying to change the narrative that's been a part of this organization for several years, where you continue to find ways to lose games or to step into these situations, the quote unquote trap game, and get caught up in that. And they did anything but that on Sunday.
Yeah, they played really well. And what's your opinion on elements in this? Now, obviously, Cleveland is a team that's used to elements. You played in Dallas, so obviously your home games were pretty toasty overall. But there were plenty of NFC East battles in December up in New York or Philadelphia, wherever it might be, playoff games as well, where you guys were on the road. How much can elements impact a game like that?
As much as you allow them to. We play in heat, we play in rain, we play in cold. We play in snow. The wind is the one thing that I think has the impact on the game that's outside of guys being mentally tough, because that definitely has an impact on the passing game, special teams. The cold it makes it a little bit more challenging on the catch. The ball is a little bit slicker, which means it's harder to catch. It's easier to fumble. So just you have to be dialed in a little bit more on your details. But other than that, it's really just a mental thing. If you let the cold impact you, then that's weakness on your part. Not being mentally strong in that point. Everybody knows what you're walking into. We had that forecast for a number of days. We knew what it was going to be like on Sunday, and you just got to get yourself mentally prepared for that. So, that's the biggest thing, whether it's, we're walking into a game that's going to be 145 on the field, or we're going to have the 4th coldest game at Soldier Field, this Sunday, and let's get ready. And I think that Ben Johnston did a really good job of that as well. He complimented the fans. I know we're going to have a full house. We're pumped to be back at home after 3 weeks. He was drumming that whole thing up. He got the players to buy in. The messaging during the course of the week is very important when you get into situations like that. And I thought he handled that very well.
Yeah, and mental toughness is certainly something that Ben Johnston has been preaching since day one in Chicago. Now let me ask you about this defense here, because it's been inconsistent this year. They've given up a lot of points. At times they've also had a lot of injuries. They still are dealing with a couple, and I think Cleveland's offense has struggled a lot in the year. Obviously, Shedeur Sanders, only a handful of starts in his career at this point, but the defense did look sharp out there, and certainly you can say, it was opponent base, but what did you take away from this defense in terms of them moving forward and playing some better opponents?
I think that'll be the big question. The last 3 games are going to be defining for the Bears and what their season is going to be. That would probably be, the one concern that I would have. It was, some of the things that our group dug into, and you get into all those stats that they've put up from a takeaway standpoint. And this was something that Dennis Allen was talking to us about earlier in the year. And I had asked him, I said, listen, it's great to have these takeaways, but how have you accomplished that? Because a lot of coaches will talk about it, and they come in bunches, and you work it all the time, but you never really get the production. You guys are getting that production. And he kind of went into the detail that they've kind of tied the takeaway theme to, and Al Harris has been a big part of that. And whether it's the footballs in the cage or the pictures of every takeaway that they've had during the course of the year, when you walk into the defensive side of the facility, you're reminded constantly of the importance of taking the football away. So it's not just talking about it; it's seeing it and it being a part of kind of your culture. And I thought that was very intriguing. And then now to come back in week 15 and just see exactly what they've accomplished all the way from back. And I think it was week 3 when we had them in or week 4, earlier in the season, to see how good they've gotten at this, and to watch Kevin Byard and to watch Deshaun Wright, be able to do the things that they're doing, and having an opportunity to talk to them and just, how that came about. It is kind of unique how Dennis has approached that, with this group. I think what you have to be concerned about beyond that, though, is in some of the key defensive metrics when you talk about, yards per game, or rushing yards per game, or yards per attempt, or yards per play. Some of those areas when you're looking at defensive statistics, the Bears are in the bottom 5, bottom 6 of the NFL. But that takeaway thing helps. It's a huge bump when you're struggling in other areas. What happens if a team comes out and plays a clean game? Because the opponents that you're looking at down the stretch in these last 3, and then if you do get into the playoffs, when you play those playoff caliber teams, they're not going to hand these things to you. It's one thing to get, the 3 takeaways from the Cleveland Browns. Can you continue to do that against the better teams in the NFL if that's what you're hanging your hat on? So I'd like to see maybe a little bit more consistency down the stretch and stuff in the run a little bit better, against a quality run game, going up against some of these good quarterbacks that they have on their schedule, and playing well in the pass game. Those are some of the things that I think you would walk away from even on Sunday with a little bit of concern with only 3 points given up.
Yeah, and certainly it's easier to turn Shedeur Sanders over than it is Matthew Stafford. So you make a really good point there. But speaking of the better teams in the NFC, you've seen a variety of teams throughout the year. You've seen this Bears team a couple times. And I think for Bears fans, it's positive that the team we're seeing now is certainly better than the team that was playing week 2, week 3, week 4. They've improved throughout the season. But how good is this team compared to the other teams in the NFC? Obviously they beat the Philadelphia Eagles. They hung in there with the Packers. They are proving that they can play with these NFC teams, but with the inexperience, Caleb Williams hasn't been to the playoffs. Ben Johnston hasn't coached in a playoff game as a head coach. You talked about some of the concerns of the defense if they're not turning the ball over. Do you feel like this team, I'm not saying can they win the Super Bowl, but can they make the playoffs, and can they win a game or two and surprise some people?
I really like Ben Johnston's quote last week coming into it. Are you a playoff team? We're not right now. We're a 9-win team. Now they're a 10-win team. I think he's correct. I think it's going to take 11 wins in the NFC to get into the playoffs. Something similar to what we saw last year with Seattle, being 10-7 and not making the cut. It's really tight at the top, and you're going to have some good teams that don't get into the playoffs. So, they've got, I know some people don't like, the phrase, you control your own destiny, but they control their playoff future. Moving forward, everything is within their control. I just think the big thing that they talked about this season under Ben Johnston was we have to change the narrative of being the Chicago Bears that always find a way to lose games that they have control of. And they've done that this year, and they've been able to find a way to win those one possession games that they continually found ways to lose last season. And so, internally, they're talking the next step now. And one of those things is going to be, getting into the playoffs. And really, when you talk about a team that's turning things around and is in year 1 with a coaching change, you just want to get in. You just want to be able to get in and have that experience. You mentioned that Ben Johnston has never had the opportunity to be a head coach in the playoffs. Caleb Williams has never had an opportunity to start a playoff game. So there's boxes you need to check. And the more experience you get, the better off the team will be. And it doesn't matter a team in transition, how you get in. Now, some of these other teams around the league, they're going to have maybe higher priorities. Hey, we just don't want to get in. We want to come in as the division champion. We want to come in with playing at least one home game. We want to come in as the conference championship and have home field throughout. So, there's going to be different benchmarks that are set. But I think for this group, the most important thing is for them is to find a way into the playoffs and get to experience what that is like, because there is a bright future just based on where they were last year and where they are right now in the month of December.
Yeah, and you talk about those experiences. So I want to bring you back to your playing days with a member of the Dallas Cowboys. And unfortunately, you guys kind of famously went 1-15 in '89 and Troy Aikman's and yours rookie season, but you built to 7-9, and then I believe it was 11-5 in year 3. Finally made the playoffs in year 3, but it was that next season where you guys really dominated and won the Super Bowl. That 11-5 season in 1991. What were some of the important things that you learned as a player that you built on? Because and actually you guys beat the Bears in the playoffs. I was actually a good point for Bears fans to remember. You guys beat the Bears there before you lost. So what were some of the learning lessons you had in 1991 that built for that future dynasty of the Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of things in 91. I think one of the bigger ones was week 12. We were 6-5 and Washington was 11-0. And we went to RFK and beat the Redskins and then ran the table, the last 5 and got to 11-5. And then we went into the playoffs. And for people that don't remember the 91 season, 92 playoffs, San Francisco didn't make it in, but I think they beat Chicago 55-10 in the last week of the regular season. We kind of squeaked by them in the playoffs in the wild card round. And there was a lot of chatter at that time that the best team in the NFC was being left out of the playoffs. I still think Washington, probably held that title. That was a fantastic season they had at 14-2. So, the big thing was going on the road as a team and a group that didn't have a whole lot of playoff experience and finding a way to win that first playoff game. The following week when we went to play the divisional round at Detroit, at that time we did not match up well with Detroit. I think a lot of people forget that Troy Aikman had hurt his knee in that Washington game and Steve Berline came off the bench and really kind of finished that season. And, won that first playoff game, at Soldier Field. So when we got to the divisional round and fell behind, the question was, do we change things up and put Troy in? We eventually did. But I remember that, he was not 100% healthy. That was just Troy being a warrior and wanting desperately to get back on the field after spending, the first couple of seasons as a professional and building that team and that organization, but not having the opportunity to start those playoff games in 91. So I think probably a lot of that 92 season and the beginning of our launching pad was Troy Aikman in the off season, just taking his game to a completely different level because of what he missed out on in 91. And then just another season of us growing together as a team. So that would have been, season 2 in Norv Turner's offense, season 4 under Jimmy Johnston as a head coach. So just think of what's possible next year for this offense. Year 2 under Ben Johnson, we took a huge stride. As good as we were in 91 offensively, especially the second half of the season, it was really that 92 season where everything really came together for us on the offensive side of the ball. And that's what this group potentially has next year. And I think sometimes we forget that Caleb Williams in year 2 is year 1 in one system and now year 1 in this system. And so I can't wait to see what his jump is next year. I think it's going to be something similar, to what you see from quarterbacks that second year when they've already had some really good success in that first year in the system.
Well, and the finish of that answer was the perfect transition point, because that's where I wanted to go next was Caleb Williams. And you were there with Troy Aikman. You were both drafted in '89. Troy was out tenured you by about 30 minutes or so from first round to second round. But you saw that develop with Troy Aikman. Now I'm going to say 2 very different quarterbacks with how they play. Troy, I just not seem to like quarterbacks who don't play on time. He seems to get frustrated sometimes when he sees Caleb on Monday Night Football. But still, at that same time, Troy was a young quarterback, threw a lot of interceptions early, continued to get better. I always remember a quote when I had Troy Aikman on a radio show years and years ago. And he said, his job, on the Dallas Cowboys, I get paid to convert third downs. That's what he said. That was my job. There was Emmett, there was Irvin, there were other guys to do it. My job was to convert third downs. And obviously he was a key part of that offense. And I think younger people don't realize how good Troy Aikman was because the career stats aren't as gaudy. But that aside, Troy Aikman, you saw the development. what were the keys for Troy that maybe are parallels to Caleb about things that need to be done better, that can be that young quarterback who still be making some mistakes to develop into a Super Bowl caliber quarterback?
Oh, really just understanding the competition level, in the NFL. And I don't think that that's something that Troy learned, going into 92 season 4 for him in the NFL. I think he had a healthy respect for, everybody playing at the NFL level. I mean, we had to come through the NFC East at that time with the Reggie Whites and the Lawrence Taylors. And, it was hard for us to get our traction as a team trying to turn things around in a division where, the Redskins were really good. The Eagles were really good. The Giants were really good. Arizona was in the NFC East back at that time. And they were still a very physical team that matched up well against us. So our divisional games were always challenging. And that was one of the big things that you were able to grow. And I think that Caleb is going to have that opportunity, in the NFC North because of Green Bay, because of Detroit, because of Minnesota. Minnesota will get things turned around next year. They'll get things sorted out. And so you're going to have 4 really, really competitive teams, and the value of every single game makes you play your best every single week. And that was one of the things that we had to deal with in the NFC East back in the early 90s. And I think that's where Troy learned and why he gets frustrated with quarterbacks that get off schedule is really because it is something that's critical. We hear it every single week, from every offensive coordinator, how important it is to stay on schedule, and how Shane Steichen continually talks to Daniel Jones about taking the easy throw. It doesn't have to always be the big throw down the field. CJ Stroud in Houston, Sam Darnold in Seattle. We hear it week after week after week with young quarterbacks or quarterbacks that have come through that reclamation process and are looking for that second start in their career. Be smart with the football. Stay on schedule. Take the easy throw. It's okay to punt. You don't have to force everything. You don't have to make the great throw. The great thing that Caleb can do is he can make throws that a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL can't. And what he has to be able to balance is understanding when the time is right for that throw. Now, that throw to DJ Moore on Sunday, is that the throw you really want to make down the stretch here as you're trying to get that playoff position secured? And then if you get into the playoffs, is that the type of throw you're going to try to make in some of those critical moments? You've done it before, so there is confidence that you're going to do it. But is there something that's safer at that time? And I think that that's always going to be his struggle as he moves forward, because he is so talented in making some of those throws, is when is the right time to try it, and when do I just take the check down? When do I just throw it away? And those were some of the things that Troy learned very quickly. You can't hold the ball against the Philadelphia defense, or it's going to be a long day. And he got sacked 11 times in 1991 by the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's a lesson that you never forget. So that ball has to come out on time. You have to stay on schedule. You can't put Reggie White and Lawrence Taylor into obvious passing situations because that stresses your offensive line. It stresses your tackles. It doesn't bode well for success. So there's a lot of things that you learn over time. And sometimes that gets accelerated because how strong your division is. And I think Caleb sits in a position where he could have that fortunate opportunity where his growth is going to be accelerated because he's got a really, really strong division. And that's going to make sure that Ben Johnson and the staff around Caleb Williams emphasize how important every single snap is during the course of the regular season, because the fit at the top of that division, one game lost, one divisional loss could keep you out of the playoffs.
And let me ask you about the Bears running game, because I think that's something that's really improved and has looked excellent over the last several weeks. And going back to your Cowboys team, and I know everyone, when they think of the Cowboys dynasty, it's Aikman, Emmett, and Irvin. That's kind of that trio that we hear about all the time. But that Dallas Cowboys running game with you leading, getting through those holes in front of Emmitt Smith, and the Cowboys offensive line that I think is arguably, maybe even the best of all time, but certainly on the short list of great offensive lines in NFL history. The Bears did a massive overhaul of the offensive line. It's certainly reaping benefits now. And that run game that the Bears have established is something that's working really well for them. And that's where I have the most positivity about this team in the playoffs, is that the fact that if they run the ball well against anybody, they will be able to control the clock. They'll be able to control the tempo. And that's something that can help them against the better teams. Obviously, that was something you guys did really well in the 90s and obviously helped you guys dominate. And that's something I see the Bears doing now that is certainly going to be part of Ben Johnston's identity moving forward.
Yeah, the ability to dictate to the defense is something that you always strive for as an offense, and we were able to do that. It didn't matter how you were going to come out and play us. We felt confident that if you were going to take away Michael Irvin, Alvin Harper, Jay Novacek in the pass game, then you leave yourself vulnerable against the run. If you're going to come out and be committed to the run, like a lot of teams talk about and a lot of defenses want to do, is to come out and shut down that run game in the beginning. You're going to have to add assets into the box, and that's going to leave you vulnerable, on the back end. So we felt comfortable, we could beat you throwing the football as well. So, that's what you're striving for. And that's one of the comments that Ben Johnston made to us over the course of the weekend, is getting to that point where, you can win running the football or throwing the football. And you'll hear some people talk about, we throw to score and we run to win. Well, you want to be able to do both. You want to be able to throw to win or run to win at the end. And you always want to be able to throw and run to score, to build that lead. You get into certain components, the 4-minute offense at the end of the game, when that defense knows exactly what you want to do and you can impose your will on them and be able to take a clock down, going back to that 6-5 versus 11-0 game in 91. We came onto the field as an offense with a little over 8 minutes to go in the game, and we took it all the way down inside 2 minutes. I think maybe even inside 1:30 before we turned that ball back over to Washington. So, to be able to kill a clock and control the flow of the game, to your point, to be able to win time of possession and limit the opportunities for a talented offense on the other side of the field, to be on the field that day is a huge thing. And these guys are trending that way. And it all happened, kind of post-bye. They took the guardrails off of Caleb, really kind of challenged him, at that point to understand all the play calls and the lengthy play calls when you add motions and shifts and different things that are happening pre-snap, and you're not becoming a stagnant offense anymore. And he's embraced that and gotten better and better with it. And that helps everything in the run game, because now your defense is not just sitting there with a stagnant group that can anticipate where you're going to run the football. Everything's changing and moving in front of them. And that creates communication and sometimes causes missed assignments. But, Ben went all the way back to his time in Miami working with Chris Forster, who's the guy that runs the San Francisco run game right now, and how long it took in Miami that year with that wide zone and getting everybody comfortable with it. And I think you mentioned the fact that you've added offensive linemen. You've got, different running backs, and you've got to get all that chemistry to start to work together. That's the hardest part about the run game, is it's usually one of the last things to come together for a team, just because it's hard to build that chemistry and camaraderie with everything up front. So that's a big part of this. And he talked about it being like week 9, week 10 in Miami back in 2016 before they felt comfortable. He's been able to achieve that here in Chicago in week 6, week 7. So he's way ahead of schedule there. So I think that what this team does down the stretch will be, contingent on how that running game continues to perform. And I think right now it's probably, performing as one of the top ones in the NFL when you go back and really start week 5 and bring it forward. What they've been able to accomplish. They're one of the best running offenses in the NFL right now.
Yeah. And last question for you. And this is just kind of on a personal level for you, as someone who was a key part of a dominant rushing attack. The NFL, a few years ago, it felt like they were abandoning the run altogether, and it was just going to be almost like it was turning into arena football with all the passes. And obviously defenses adjust, and we're seeing offenses adjust back to the run. Is that a more enjoyable game for you, seeing a more balanced attack and seeing teams running the football more than they were 4, 5, 6 years ago?
Yeah, I don't know why we started to slide away from it a little bit. I understand the athleticism of these athletes that are on NFL fields, and what they can do in space is extremely unique. It's much different than when I was, playing back in the 80s and 90s. The quick screens to the outside, the game kind of moving away from being, something condensed to something spread out, and moving away from the running game to the point where the running back position, became undervalued. And I think it's just the success that we've seen from certain teams, over the last, 5 to 8 years that have kind of brought that back, or how these teams are being built to consistently go to the playoffs year in and year out. And I think the biggest message that was sent by Philadelphia last year, With the season that Saquon Barkley had, with the way that they handled Kansas City in the Super Bowl, dominating both lines of scrimmage. They could run the football at will. They really made Kansas City one-dimensional, and then all of a sudden the score gets away from you. So there was a huge point proven last year that the team that controls the line of scrimmage controls the game and controls how that game is going to play out. As long as you play clean and you don't make mistakes and you're controlling the line of scrimmage, you should win every game that you're playing. And that's one of the things that I love is just kind of getting in there and digging into what's going on down in the trenches. Because that's some really fun stuff. That's why Seattle is a very dangerous team right now. They're one of those teams that can really dominate. On the defensive side, their offensive line is getting better. I don't think we have a team like we had with Philadelphia last year when they really hit their stride and they were so dominant on both sides of the line of scrimmage that it was going to be a tough task for anybody to take them down. I think we see a number of teams that are very strong in the defensive line. We see a number of teams that are very good in the offensive line, but it's hard to find, that team that has both of them. I think that's something that's carried Denver a little bit this season, because when you look at them, the sacks that they have from a defensive standpoint, but the ability that offensive line has that's grown and matured. They're another team similar to Chicago. Sean Payton, when he got out to Denver, we got to be better in the offensive line. And that's, those are the teams that you'll start to see, get into quick turnarounds and things like that. So I was impressed by Ryan Poles and Ben Johnston coming in and saying, hey, the first thing we're doing is we got to get better up front. And that's going to pay huge dividends, because it doesn't matter how talented your skill players are. It doesn't matter how good your running backs are. If you don't have running lanes and you don't have pass protection, then all that skill on the outside or in the backfield kind of gets wasted, because you don't have the ability to open things up for them up front.
All right, well, there he is, Daryl Moose Johnston, of course, NFL on Fox. And for those of the younger listeners, this is truly one of the great pure fullbacks in NFL history, part of the Dallas Cowboys dynasty in the 90s. Moose, thanks for so much time. I really enjoyed the conversation and hope to catch up with you down the line. Yeah,
you're welcome. Good luck to the Bears down the stretch. It's going to be fun to watch.
All right, there he is, Daryl Johnston, everybody. Good interview with Daryl. I know some people did not love his analysis on Sunday against the Browns, and I get it. Look, Daryl's a guy that is, he grew up with Troy Aikman, basically, right, through the NFL. That's how he won with Troy Aikman. That's how he wants his quarterbacks to play. He wants his quarterbacks to play in the pocket, play within the constructs of the offense, play on time. He doesn't want a guy who's going to create a lot. So, yeah, he's going to have some difference of opinions there, and you kind of heard it there. Caleb's incredible throw to DJ Moore. He's like, should you have thrown something safer than that one? Like, you just kind of see it. It's just kind of like built into his football DNA at this point. But I love Moose, Syracuse guy. I'm a Syracuse guy. I'm a big fan of Moose. I think he's done a great job as an analyst over the last, probably 20 years or so. He's been doing that for the NFL. So I'm a big fan of Moose. Like I said, everybody didn't love his analysis on Sunday, but at the same time, you do appreciate outside opinions. Instead of just being in our Chicago echo chamber, you want to hear what other people have to say. Even if you disagree with it and think it's wildly off base, you'd like to know what other people across the country, at least I do, think about the Chicago Bears and about Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams. So we'll keep this, the end of this podcast brief. We'll get to the mailbag here. Not too many questions this week. Let's jump in. Siege says, we now know Ozzie can hold up against two of the best defenders. Thoughts on his improvement, and can he solve the left tackle issue? So Siege, I think absolutely. And this is a question that they are going to have to ask. I think the Bears at this point, Ben Johnson, Ryan Poles, Dan Rochar, are comfortable in saying Darnell Wright and Ozzie Trapillo are going to be our tackles in 2026. What they have to decide is if they think if it's going to be Darnell Wright on the left side and Ozzie Trapillo on the right side, if it's worth trying to make that switch, being they were not confident, as we know, about Ozzie Trapillo making this switch from the right to the left side at the beginning of the season. He's kind of gotten thrown in here because he needed to, and he's going to hold on to that job, and clearly he's going to stay with it now over Theo Benedict, and he should, based on performance, especially in pass blocking. And look, look, you play against Myles Garrett, you're going to get beat. Nobody expected Trapillo to be perfect out there, but he is a step slow. He is not, at least at this point, some, wall that you cannot get around on the left side. He is competent, and that's okay. What I'm saying why they have to decide this is, all right, let's use a scale of 1 to 10. If they say, all right, Ozzy Trapillo and 5 being average, 1 being abysmal, 1's Larry Borum, right? 5's or Karan Amagaji. 5 is NFL average. 10 is elite, is Trent Williams, is Jason Peters, Anthony Munoz, Hall of Fame level, right? That's 10. If we're saying Darnell Wright on the right side is an 8, and Ozzy Trapillo on the left side is a 5. If we're saying that's what that can be, because Ozzy Trapillo's not a 5 right now. Ozzy Trapillo's a 4, probably. I don't think he's an average left tackle. I think he's below average. When you have that much talent across the rest of the line, that's fine. You can absolutely get away with that. So if Darnell Wright's an 8 and Ozzy Trapillo is a 4, and, so you're talking about you got 12 out of 20 on your 2 tackles right now. If they switch them and Darnell Wright drops to a 7, but Ozzy Trapillo jumps up to a 6, is that worth the improved play from Trapillo, even if Darnell Wright's not quite as good on the left side? That's where I think they need to decide exactly what they're going to do with the tackle position. Now, I think most likely, Siege, they're not going to do anything crazy. They are going to sit there and say, let's keep Ozzy on the left side, let's keep Darnell on the right side, and let's march forward. I think that's probably what they're going to do. But Trapillo has certainly shown enough that they don't need to worry too much about the tackle position next season, which is critical because, we've talked about on this podcast, they don't have a lot of money. Their draft capital early on really needs to go to the defensive side of the ball. So they aren't going to have a lot of wiggle room at tackle. They really need Trapillo to come through here. So when they look at it, when you look at it overall on next year's line, assuming all 3 interior guys are back, I don't know if Ryan Bates is going to be back. They're going to need a backup center. That's not the end of the world. Maybe Luke Newman can be that after a year. Maybe he can handle center reps. Right now, he's only doing guard reps. We'll see about that. Theo Benedict. Do they want to move him inside and have him play more guard? Do they want to keep him as a swing tackle? If they want Benedict to be more inside, which is a better fit for him, mind you, if you move Benedict inside next year and have him back up between Tooney and Jackson, there could be a world where Benedict is good enough to start as a guard in 2027. So that's the other thing you need to think about is where do these guys best slate moving forward in terms of their best positions. Benedict, I think's best position is inside. Do they want to start making him more of that backup guard in case he needs to go in there? And then they need to find a swing tackle. So they've got some issues, but nothing as critical as starters. I think the starting 5 this year is your starting 5 next year. I doubt they make the tackle switch because it's been competent this year. Why mess with something that's working? So I think, yes, Siege overall happy with the tackle position, and I don't think they're going to do anything drastic. All right, Bear Don says, still don't know how this is exactly going to work in the secondary in 2026. How do you think the Bears figure out how to make this work with all these different players, some injured, some healthy, some free agents, some under contract? All right. I actually was putting some thought into that. I'm glad this question came up because I actually put some thought into that question this week. And to me, this is how I'm looking at this. All right. Jaquan Brisker, I think you let him walk. He's had a good season. He hasn't had a great season. Concussion history. I know he's been on the field this year. I don't want to pay Jaquan Brisker $12, $13, $14 million a year, which you're probably, if you're trying to retain a safety, you're probably going to need to do that. You can let Brisker, check and see what his market is. Maybe it's affordable enough where you can keep him. I think you let Brisker walk. I think you sign Kevin Byard to a 2-year contract extension with 1 year guaranteed. You said, here's your guaranteed money for 2026. If you play well again, we'll bring you back in 2027. But otherwise, if it's time to retire or things struggle, we'll move on from you. I think that's what you do. I think you re-sign CJ Gardner-Johnson but you're going to play CJ Gardner-Johnson at safety. He's got position flexibility. He can do both. Move CJ to safety. He replaces Jaquan Brisker. You've got Byard and Brisker. Kyler Gordon is your nickel. Tyreek Stevenson is your corner. If they love Tyreek and they want to extend him, they can do that. Otherwise, Tyreek Stevenson has 1 year left under contract. Tyreek Stevenson's your other corner. That brings you to the other side. You're not going to be able to pay Nahshon Wright to stay as the team's backup. Jalen Johnson is making a lot of money. The Bears are going to have to make a tough decision. Do they re-sign Nahshon Wright and move on from Jalen Johnson? That's what I said. I'm not saying it's an easy, and you may sit there, they cannot move on from Jalen Johnson. And if that's the Bears' decision as well, then you let Nahshon Wright walk. He signs a fairly sizable contract. I assume $10, $12, $13 million based on the season he's had, and he's still fairly young. I think Nahshon Wright gets a fairly sizable contract, and the Chicago Bears just say comp pick formula with Wright. If they decide that Jalen Johnson is not the guy moving forward with the injuries, with Dennis Allen's scheme, I am not saying they should get rid of Jalen Johnson. I'm saying if they decide they move Jalen Johnson, they sign Nahshon Wright to play the other corner. I also think the Bears should spend a day 2 pick on a safety. It can be in the round 3. That's a lot where a lot of safeties start coming off the board. Don't have to like break the bank and get like a first round safety that's going to start right away. Get like a round 3, maybe a round 4 safety that could start as a rookie, but wouldn't be a problem if they were your third safety. This is why I like this setup. That third safety or that rookie safety is your third safety. Kyler Gordon, you cannot trust him right now to stay healthy. I just, he misses usually 2 to 4 games a year. This year, he's basically missed the whole season. You don't know what's going on with that, but you've already guaranteed money to Kyler Gordon. So Gordon's coming back next year. Then if Gordon gets hurt, CJ Gardner-Johnson can move to nickel and the rookie safety can slide in and start. I think that's the way you do it. You don't have to commit that much more money in terms of anything you do. Byard, I think you can get kind of affordable. CJ Gardner-Johnson obviously going to be making more money than Brisker's rookie contract, but overall, you kind of keep the same secondary intact and you don't really add too much cash into the secondary. I think that is probably the most sensible thing to do with the secondary at this point. I've been going on a while, so let me get to the prediction and then we'll move on because on my full-time job, I've got a meeting coming up here in 5 minutes, the Life of Recording podcast. So Packers, as I said, I am feeling really good about this game. I think the Bears are absolutely going to win this game. There's the fallen hero spot where a team rallies around losing a key player. And, I think that happens more in kind of basketball and things like that. I think the Packers are going to be pretty down on this Parsons thing. I'm not saying they're going to come out and be totally flat and the Bears are going to crush them, but I do think they're going to be a little flat. I think that defense, I think we're going to see just how important Parsons was to that defense. He is a multiplier. When you add Parsons and he's getting consistent pressure, it makes the entire defense better. When you lose Parsons, Rashawn Gary is not a consistent pass rusher as a top edge. He's a very nice secondary pass rusher. He's not a top edge pass rusher, at least in my eyes. When Gary's the guy that you can focus on, they've already got Devontae Wyatt out. That defensive line suddenly isn't, Lucas Van Ness isn't that much. Suddenly that defensive line is pretty manageable, especially for the Bears offensive line. If their pressure's not coming on Caleb Williams, if he doesn't have to account for Micah Parsons regularly, that's going to make the entire defense much worse. So suddenly Jeff Hafley's top 10-ish unit in a top 10 unit, probably a top 20 unit, below average type unit. That's what I think of this Packers unit without Micah Parsons. The offense is still good, but they're missing guys like Tucker Kraft. So I think the Bears win this game. I think the Bears win it comfortably. I know the Packers are favored. I think the Bears should be favored. With the Parsons injury, I think the Bears should be favored in this one. Not by a lot, just 1 or 2 points, but they're not. Packers are favored. I think the Bears win this one. I think they win this by more than a score. I think we're looking at like a 27-17 type game. Bears win this comfortably, go up game and a half with the magic number basically at 1 to win the division with 2 weeks to go, and they put themselves in a prime spot. And after they beat the Eagles, barely lose to the Packers, crush the Browns, and beat the Packers, they will have arrived as a true contender in the NFC playoffs with a monstrous game. And I've talked about how much is leveraged on this 49ers game. A monstrous game coming up the week after. But first things first, got to beat the Green Bay Packers. I think they do it. I think they win by 10. I'm calling it 27-17. That's going to do it for Bears Banter. We're entering the holiday season. Things get a little wonky for me. I'll make sure I get some content at you for sure, though. We've got some good guests lined up for late December and into January as well. If you've been following along all season, you know some of the beat writers that are still missing. We'll get them on. We've got a couple other people we're working on. Should be a lot of fun as the Bears, hopefully, fingers crossed, head to the playoffs. It's been a wild run here. Bear down, everybody. Keep enjoying this season. It's been fun. We'll talk to you soon. Adios.